What's good, friends? Ebony Chappelle checking in with something spiritual for your podcast listening and viewing pleasure. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of What's Good with Ebony Chappelle. Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of the show. Remember to like and subscribe, rate and review, leave comments. Thank you to everybody that has been supporting the podcast. Y'all are the best. Really appreciate you. As always, you can connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Ebony the Writer. I always forget that last one. And you can check me out online on my website, ebonychappelle.com. So, what's good with me? What's been good with me lately is taking risk and having fun. So I've been doing a lot of new cool stuff lately. Free People Party. For those of you that don't know, I threw a party with two of my friends and it was fantastic. So we did it a couple of weekends ago, the beginning of October, and we have the next Free People Party coming up November the 20th. So if you're in Indianapolis, if you plan on visiting the Indianapolis area, be sure to check it out. And when people were asking me, what is Free People Party? What's going on? It's just a dance party. It's a dance set for people that love good music, that don't want to hear trap music when they go to the club all night, that want to experience something else and just have a good time, an enjoyable time. Also, people that like to get dressed when they go out, because I think that started to shift some kind of way over the years. I'm an elder millennial, so I'm showing my age at that point, talking about how we used to dress when we would go to the club. But it's just fun. It's a Sunday night party from 8 to 1, so it's still early enough that you can make it home and get to sleep if you have to be in the office the next morning. So something else really cool that is going on, I mentioned it on an earlier episode of the show, but the testimony service is coming back. We are going to be hosting another service November the 12th at Broadway United Methodist Church. I'm so excited for that. This will be my first time having an event in the Spirit and Place Festival. So I'm really, really excited. So it's a lot going on right now. And with that, it can become very overwhelming at times. So, like this week in particular has been a pretty challenging week just internally with me just having to regulate myself and make sure that my spiritual and mental health is where it needs to be. So I'm trying my best, and I have been leaning into my meditation more. I've been leaning into listening to podcasts and different things that uplift me more, reading things that are uplifting, just to try to make sure that that side of me is fed. And one of the people who I always look forward to seeing on social media, because social media can be a source for this stuff as well if you curate your news feed properly. So you're only seeing positive stuff and not so much mess. It can be hard though, because they throw a lot of shit in there that you didn't ask for, but that's another conversation for another day. But one of the people that I really look forward to seeing their post is Jason Powell. And Jason is the guest on today's show. So Jason, I first met when I was attending Light of the World many moons ago. I rejoined Light of the World, which is a church here in Indianapolis. I rejoined Light of the World at the beginning of this year. But when I was originally there, he was over the music ministry. So fast forward some years, and he is still living and working in his gifting in a whole new way. So he's somebody that really the type of things that he shares is all about learning how to empower yourself spiritually using the tools that you have on the inside and becoming empowered that way. So I really appreciate his approach to it and how grounded it is, how a lot of the messages remind us to recognize and connect with that divinity that exists within us and to see it, in the world around us as well. So I am probably not doing the best job of explaining this. So let's just hear from Jason. So without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Jason Powell. Yeah. Well, I like to start every interview by asking people what's good with them. So this can be anything that is bringing a smile to your face, that's bringing joy to your life. So, what's good with Jason Powell?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So what's good with me is the fact that I've been able to have some space. I think it's so important to create space in our lives. If you're an introvert like me, then I feel
Same.
like you have to carve out the space where you can breathe and recoup. Some folks get energy from the activity and being around people. And while I can
Mm-hmm.
be extroverted at times, I find that I gain my energy by my quiet time, by my quiet space. For instance, like when I'm with my kids, which I have been with my kids a lot these past few weeks. I went on a 2 week trip with my parents and my kids. My mom and my kids were together, and then my dad and my kids were together. So we
Mm-hmm.
traveled to the East Coast. That was great. And then this whole past week, I had them during the day and some nights. So me and my ex-wife co-parent our kids, and
Mm-hmm.
so that gives me joy as well because there's not a lot of drama involved, and I'm thankful for that.
Oh, yes.
And so all of those things kind of make me be able to say that's good. And now this little space I have that I'm creating for myself today is good too.
Awesome. What a blessing. One, okay, so I don't even want to pretend that I know anything about parenting because I don't. I have a cat. That's and I'm an auntie. But watching people co-parent, I've seen some really beautiful examples of that in my adult life. And I just think it's such a wonderful thing to be blessed to have that type of environment for kids to grow up in where they don't feel like pulled in a million different directions and like the adults in my life don't get along. Like that's it's just such a blessing to hear that.
Yeah, I think so. So first, let me say I'm not perfect and I don't know a soul who is, but I think
Hmm.
it's good to actually be aware of the fact, even with co-parenting, I think it's good to be aware of the fact that the energy that exists between me and my kids, me and their mom, me and their step parent, all of that I think involves what energy is expressed in how I'm raising my kids. And so
Hmm.
I find myself, it's not really always about the other person, it's about how I'm reacting. Um,
Yeah.
so if I can control how I react and how I respond, which again, I'm not always perfect at it, but if and when I control it in positive, beneficial ways, I find that that's what's most important because we can't control other
Hmm.
people, but we can control ourselves. And I think the extent to which we are able to control our own responses and reactions, I think that's what's most important and what creates a healthy environment. Whether you're married, whether you're single, whether you're
Hmm.
co-parenting, I think it's our internal responses and reactions that create the good that we're desiring. So every day, that's what I'm trying to do is keep myself right,
Hmm.
get myself right, maintain
Yes.
my own good energy.
Listen, and it is a whole thing all on its own. It's so
Yeah.
funny because I didn't because it's a seemingly simple concept to just like look after yourself and then you'll see how things work out for you. But it has taken me a really long time to really understand that. And I would say over
Yeah.
the past few years, it really like hit me. What was that moment for you where you realized, okay, this is the key to having what I want?
So I feel like I've always kind of been this seeker, if you will, like a
Okay.
seeker of what makes life work. Um,
Mm,
what causes some folks to get the good out of life. This show is called What's Good. I feel like I've
yeah.
always kind of had that internal desire to know how to get the good out of it, and so my life has constantly reflected back to me, I think, different stages of my journey. I feel like life can really serve as a mirror for us in a whole lot of ways when we accept it as
Mm.
such. I think that's probably though one of the hardest things for us to accept, that life is a mirror for us in so many ways. But I think
Especially when you look in it and it don't look good. You're like, ew, I can't believe that.
yeah, 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 yeah. And especially the stuff that doesn't look good, for me to be able to say, okay, what is it in myself that I have to come to grips with? Um,
Hmm.
for instance, if I'm so quick to always um, throw in the towel and say, okay, next, What is that about me that I need to come to grips with, that maybe there's something in myself I need to deal with? And so I
Mm,
feel like that's like the first, this self awareness, I think, is really what we're leaning into in this conversation. Like self
yeah.
awareness, I think, is so huge for knowing how to get the good out of life. But I'll say that even from the time I was a kid, all the way up to the different relationships, to the different career moves, to the different uh, environments in which I found myself, the good, the
Hmm.
bad, the great moments, the moments that cause strife. I think just being able to have self awareness with it all and say, okay, self, how can I pivot in this moment? When things aren't necessarily feeling good, how can I pivot um, to some relief thoughts, right? So if somebody's working my nerves, let me just go to my household, right? So when my child is pressing my button and working my nerves, I have a choice whether I
Hmm.
can go off, right? Or that's not going to be beneficial to that child or for myself. So I have to
Yeah.
pivot to say, okay, this is an expressive child. This is a child who's learning. And so how can I gently redirect them? So
Hmm.
for me, just constantly learning how to pivot to the relieving thought so that the resistance doesn't have all the attention.
Mm.
But leaning into the self awareness, I think, is huge.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot that I'm just soaking in from that. I want to backtrack a little bit because we just like jump right on into it, which I
We
love so
did.
much. But when we first met, we were members of the same church many, many moons ago. And you were leading in the music ministry and all of that, and just doing such a beautiful job. And then I've been able to watch you online and just see how your life has grown and transitioned since then. Give us a background of your journey through ministry and what you're into these days.
Sure, sure. So, not to just tell you everything because we might be here too long, but
I'm
I
like,
feel
whatever you
like,
want to share.
right. I feel like ministry for me has not been a straight line, and probably for
Hmm.
most folks, whatever path you're on, is probably not always a straight shot.
Yeah.
Maybe for some people it is, but for me it hasn't been. So for me as a kid, I began being heavily involved in music ministry. Actually, I was a teenager at Light of the World Christian Church in Indianapolis, and really at that moment, probably mid-teens, late teen, 14, 15, I began to like really sense a strong calling to music ministry in and of itself. So just being in
Hmm.
that environment, in that space, really helped a lot. And serving in that space as a teen helped a lot. Then being in the college years when I went to Howard for a couple of years and then matriculated to Morgan State for a year or so, and then had some downtime in between there where I wasn't in school, but then eventually ended up graduating from Christian Theological Seminary in 2018, to fast forward a few years. But to go back to
Hmm.
my undergrad years, when I was there, I was serving at a church called Metropolitan Baptist Church in their music ministry. That really honed a lot of my praise and worship, song writing and worship leading and stuff like that, and just being able to, number one, feel the temperature of the spirit through musical skill, and yet also through connecting with the people and the aura of spirit in that space. So that really
Hmm.
helped to develop me a lot. And then I think, as you mentioned, we might have met. Did we meet at Light of the World?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I had just joined Light of the World because I was finishing college at the time. I was at Ball State and
Ah,
came home, and there was a way for me to have like a little part-time job at the church, but the deal was like you got to be a member of the church. So I was like, okay,
ah.
cool. This ain't too bad of a trade-off. I can do that. So yeah, that's what was going on with me at the time. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yes. And see, but that's awesome that that opportunity was presented in your life, and it's all
Hmm.
so. Do you feel like, I know this is an interview with me, but do you feel like that opportunity kind of led in some way to what you're doing now?
Yeah, I do. So I had been like doing different things in media since I was a little kid, and wanted to, when I was coming home from school, wanted to work in the field, but it was so hard to find a job, and the only stuff that really worked was freelancing. So I knew people that had like little opportunities here and there. So like out light of the world. I could do stuff there. Then I had a friend that worked with New Life and would ask me to come in and like edit stuff, and I could make a couple
Mhm.
dollars doing that. So I just would like bounce around town and cobble together every little piece of a job into something for
Yes,
myself.
yes.
But it certainly helped out a lot. And I think one of the biggest things was being in an environment that was supportive of my gifting
Mhm.
and gave me an opportunity to use it, because
Yeah.
otherwise I don't know that I would have had opportunity to do it at that time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, that's a huge point, right? Being in an environment that's supportive of your gifting and then putting it to
Yeah.
use, right?
Mhm.
Like if we don't use a limb, then we won't have a limb to use.
Yep.
And so I feel like it's the same thing, with our skill sets or our gifts, right? If we don't
Mhm.
use them or we don't exercise them, then we won't have them to use. And so I think that wherever we find ourselves on our journey, I think it's like it can serve, it has the opportunity to serve as the perfect launching pad for whatever our next is. And so some people I think are uncomfortable with seeing where they are as a launching pad, but we're always in a state of flux. We're always in a state of
Yeah.
motion, right? And so I think when we stop changing, when we stop growing, when we stop evolving, then we are saying, well, I'm not going to live into the fullness of who I can be. And I feel like we're
Mm.
all sent to the earth, with a divine seed, a divine deposit of something great. And it's up to us to say yes to where we are and also see that where we are is contributing to where we're going. And I
Yeah.
think that helps us to also not feel stuck. I feel like sometimes we can always, some of us can feel stuck. And I think it's important for us to recognize that where we are is the perfect place to where we desire to be. And to believe
Mhm.
that, and to have that self awareness there, I think is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what are you doing in ministry these days? Because I know you have transitioned from Light of the World, and I was looking at your YouTube and signed up for the newsletter and all that stuff. So tell us a
Thank you.
little bit
Awesome.
about, yes, of course. So tell us a little bit about the things that you're into now and what your mission is when it comes to ministry at this point.
Absolutely. So what I'm doing now is in many ways connected to what I was doing for the past
Mhm.
5 years. At the end of 2021, I left my role at Life Journey Church as the worship minister. But Life Journey meant something pivotal in my experience in that it was the first space that I served in that was an openly affirming congregation and
Mhm.
that had an image for me of what it looks like to serve in integrity in ministry with a theology of inclusion.
Yeah,
And
and
so
for
for
people
me,
that don't know what an affirming ministry is, break it down for
yes,
us.
okay, sure.
Yes.
So an affirming ministry is not just a ministry or a church that says we accept you if you're straight, if you're gay, if you're trans. Not only do we accept you, but we affirm that God has divinely designed you that way and
Mm,
that it is not a mark against your humanity, it's an expression of the divine, for you to be the non-heteronormative.
mhm,
And even if you are hetero, that's an expression of the divine. It's saying that the essence of your humanity is not only welcome but affirmed. And so I think in some spaces, we are taught that, if you're anything but the heteronormative dominant populace, then you are some way not well, or there's
mhm,
something wrong with you. And so that theology was uprooted out of me in a, in
mm,
in a wonderful way over a process of many years, but really found its light once I was involved at Christian Theological Seminary as a student there, and just began to understand the nature and the heart of God outside of, I think, some of the religious confines that I knew as a kid, but really broadened my understanding of the roots of certain scriptures, of the roots of the text, and how it relates to God's image in the world through us. So all of that, I think, really contributed to my ability to be at Life Journey. Now, pivoting from that, I've sensed a strong call to be mobile and to do ministry in a mobile way. So that's online, that's visiting different geographical locations, sharing either music ministry and or preaching teaching. And if those of you who want to know more about what I do, you can also go to jasonpowell.faith. That's www.jasonpowell.faith. And you'll kind of see more of what I mean when I say inclusion and affirming. But at the end of the day, it's about understanding the divine design within you. And I feel like my journey now is leading me outside of the four walls of one local church, but to
Mm-hmm.
spread that in various ways across different spaces.
Yeah, which is incredible for so many different reasons. One, of course, we all, lived through COVID. Well, that part of it, because who knows where we're at now. But
Right, exactly.
in that time, not being able to gather in a traditional sense for church service, and some people had that never fit them anyway, going out and going into a building. So
Right.
now that things have switched up on a large scale, having that as, foundational to your ministry is so cool, because it's like this is what people were into. Like, I was able to connect with so many different communities of faith during the pandemic that I had never would have had an opportunity to otherwise.
Okay. Hmm.
But yeah, so we talked about one with Agape in Beverly
Yeah.
Hills, California. So I'd always heard about this church, and I was like, that sounds really cool. And then just never thought about it. And then pandemic hit, and I was like, well, let me see if they have a Facebook page. And then, just kind of fell into it from there. So I think that is so, so cool. What are some of your biggest takeaways from the ability to connect with different people online and travel and do that, as opposed to what you were doing before when you were kind of like grounded at a specific place?
So I feel like number one, it has to do with what the individual senses a strong calling toward,
Mm-hmm.
because I think we all have different assignments. So I think it's discerning what ignites the passion within you. And I feel
Yeah.
like what ignites the passion within you is a signpost to your assignment. So for me, the igniting of passion has to do with spreading the message, spreading the message, and spreading the music, and in spreading the message of God's inclusive love and doing that through music, and spreading the message of divine empowerment through a lens of inclusion. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I say spreading the message of divine empowerment through the lens of inclusion, I'm saying this. In the past, people might have said, you got to tarry for the Holy Ghost, and if you're going to have the Holy Ghost, then you can't wear pants and you can't watch movies, and like all this
Yep. Mm-hmm.
doctrine and religious stuff that I think clogs the soul from actually breathing in the life of God. And so the path that I'm on now, if I'm answering your question, the path that I'm on now is recognizing that my soul comes alive when I'm in motion, when I'm spreading to different places and different spaces, because I sense that that's my call. I sense
Mm-hmm.
that's what God wants me to do. And so I feel like we
Yeah.
should all just do what we sense we're called to do. Everybody's not called to do the same thing, but I think we can respect people's assignments and not make other people's assignments our assignments, or feel any type of way because ours is different from someone else's.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge thing that we get caught up in. Comparison is the thief of joy, and so I think if we're
Big
always
time.
comparing ourselves, well, what's this person doing? What's that person doing? Well, what am I doing, and what am I called to do? And let me get in my lane and do that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really the space that I'm in right now.
Yeah, and you absolutely answered my question. And I'm trying to keep myself on track, because as soon as I'm thinking about a direction I want to go in, or something else pops up, and I'm like, oh my God, I want to know if it's that thing too. So I might jump around a little bit. But when you were describing just now about how you feel like, your soul is on fire when you're in motion, and that feels very connected to you and like the direction you should be moving in with your ministry, would you consider that feeling to be desire?
That's really good. Um, at its primordial essence, yes,
Okay.
because I truly believe, like when it comes to spiritual law, I feel like desire is the seed. There's an
Mm.
author, Neville Goddard, who has this wonderful quote that I love. He was a Christian mystic, New Thought teacher. But in his book Resurrection, it states the spiritual man speaks to the natural man through the language of desire, uh,
Mm.
and unhesitating obedience to its voice is an immediate assumption of the wish fulfilled. Now that's a lot of words, but what he
It's a
means
lot, but
by
I'm
that,
connected. Yeah. Yeah.
what he means by that, from my understanding of his writings, is that when you desire something, it's the spiritual unseen realm of God trying to communicate something through you that God wants to be manifested in the realm of earth. And
Mhm.
when we uh, are positioning ourselves to feel it done, and the good feeling that that feels like, that we are conduits of that desire, and that it can be done through us, that it is being done through us, and we instantly begin to merge with it, then it opens the pathway for us to be a conduit of it. Um,
Mhm.
and so I really do think that when God is speaking, God God opens our souls with divine nudges. Now, of course, oftentimes we'll say, "Oh no, that can't be," and so then we kind of put our own caveats on the desire, and we kind of
Absolutely.
lessen the desire. Um,
Mhm.
but I think at its prime, or even worse, we will steer desire negatively. Um,
Yep.
and so we got to work on all that. But that's why we're here. We're here
Mhm.
to learn how to navigate that stuff within ourselves, I think. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the reason why I asked is because and now I'm gonna have to look up Neville Goddard and read because that's like right up my alley. But the
Mm.
reason why I asked that is because I think, and this has been my experience, growing up in the Christian faith, is that a lot of times, especially back in the day, the message that I felt like I was getting overwhelmingly was that there was something wrong with my desire. So desiring things in general was wrong. So
See, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
and I've heard some of that too, but I don't see
Mhm.
how people can come to that conclusion, especially when you look at the words of Jesus. I mean, I probably one of my favorite scriptures would be Mark 11:24, where Jesus is
Mm.
saying, "What things soever you desire when you pray, believe that you receive them." So,
Mhm.
like, desire is something Jesus deals a lot with, but religion doesn't want us to really, dig into that too much.
No, which I'm interested to know, especially as someone that has gone to seminary. It's so funny, little sidebar, but I remember when I first, because I desire to go to seminary. And I remember when I first mentioned it to someone, they were like, well, be careful because sometimes people leave, child, and they don't even believe in God no more. And I was like,
That's
okay. So I just kind of like filed that away in the back of my head. Like, that's not something I'm worried about, but thank you for the tip. But as someone that has studied and has, had your own journeys and whatnot, why do you think religion wants to keep us away from those parts of the faith of understanding how our desire can be a conduit for the divine?
I think depending upon the religious lens that you come from, some folks don't even know that that's what they're doing. That's number one. I
Mm,
mean, some folks just don't know. And then two, I think other folks want to maintain control.
okay, yeah.
Um, and so I feel like if you teach people raw spiritual truth, in some ways, you can't control people the way you do. And so that puts the institution, at least those who use it for controlling purposes, it puts those institutions at risk.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's not something that people want to delve into, I think. So, but yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's awesome that you have thought about going to seminary. I used to hear that too, don't go to seminary because they'll ruin you, stuff like that.
Hmm.
But for me, I'm gonna tell you what it did for me. It broadened my concept of God, and it made me free.
Mm.
And what does the scripture say? When the sun sets free, it's free
It's free
indeed.
indeed.
Stand fast in the liberty wherewith you have been made free, right? So, like, I mean, you think of all these things, and freedom at its primordial essence, I think, is based in knowing who you are and knowing
Mm-hmm.
who God is. And one great deceased Christian spiritual teacher, who I'm not afraid to mention his name, Reverend Ike, used to say, when you know who God is, you know who you are. And when you begin to know who you are, you begin to know who God is. So
Mm.
that really resonates with me.
Wow, that is powerful. That is so powerful. And in that vein, as much as you're comfortable with sharing, I wanted to have you share a little bit of your testimony as far as the different ways that you have learned to express who you are as a human being, especially over the past few years. So you mentioned when you were studying at CTS, coming into understanding of certain things about yourself and broadening your understanding about God, and then being at Life Journey Church, which is an affirming congregation. When I first met you, you were married to a beautiful woman with kids and everything. And then just randomly, I'm on Facebook one day and I see a post. I can't even remember what the post said, but I was like, well, good for them. But then I was just like, wow, okay, like I don't know. When I see certain stuff, I don't know. My response to it is not necessarily always, I guess, the normal response. I'm more so like, there's somebody that is probably very happy with themselves in their life at this point, so that's a great thing, no matter what it is. But I said all that to say, when did you like? How did that journey go for you to decide to figure out? Okay, this is who I am in terms of like my sexual identity.
Right. So I knew that I was attracted to the same gender like when I was a
Hmm.
teenager, probably
Okay.
before that. But living into that aspect of myself based upon my religious upbringing and the cultural norms and,
Mhm.
like all the stories, that you hear through your
Yeah.
family line and through culture, that wasn't an option. Like, just wasn't an option. So
So
I
you just shut
found
it down from
myself.
the beginning when you realized that that was who you were. You were just like, "Nah, I'm not even about to."
Yeah, well, I mean, I said, you know, I I think like a lot of teenagers do,
Mhm.
I explored who I am, but
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily uh, come to the conclusion that this is what I'm going to live into. So I was
Got
married
it.
young. I was married at 20. Um,
That is very young.
Yeah.
Wow.
Um, and we were married for 7.5 years, but
Mhm.
we both knew about each other before we were
Okay.
married, But again, living into that was not an option based on our God concepts at that time, or I should say, the limitation of our idea of God
Got
and
it.
our cultural programming,
Mhm.
and our subconscious programming, which I think is related to your God concepts too.
Yeah.
So you take all that into play, and it's interesting because she is now remarried, and her wife is someone who has a inclusive worldview in her own way. And so I think it's
Mhm.
wild that me and my kids' mom were both on this spectrum of non-heterosexual reality. And so, what do you do
Mhm.
with that, right? You either sweep it under the rug and don't accept that that's a part of you, just like your skin is a part of you, and you can't,
Yeah.
change your skin color. People say, well, if you just have enough faith. Well, is that really, is that
Yeah.
rational? Is that a responsible use of faith? To say, well, if I just believe hard enough, I can change my skin from brown to white. That's not a reasonable use of faith. And so I
No.
say it applies the same way with your sexuality. The question is, how do I use my sexuality in healthy ways? How do I live into it in healthy ways?
Mhm.
And I think that's a question
Okay.
for everybody, regardless of your orientation.
What would you consider to be a healthy way? Is it like more like an individual decision, or do you have like an understanding that's more of like broader of what it means to live it out in a healthy way?
So it looks like one thing for me. For
Okay.
someone else, it might look like something different. And I'm not here, or nor do I see myself as the police of
Got
what
it.
that looks like for other people. But I think
Mhm.
when it's based out of love, respect, mutuality, and commitment, those are things for me that I value, respect, and I think that when you see yourself as a spiritual being, it's
Mhm.
always important to create space, as we started off this conversation with, to create space for your spirit to grow and evolve. And so, just because I live into the truth of me being a same gender loving person or a same gender attracted person, for me,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that I have the freedom to just go out here and do whatever I want to do. Um,
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like you said, you're a spiritual person, so there's some sort of like care and concern about how you operate when it comes to
right,
that. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
exactly.
How did you manage, and I'm trying to find the best way to say this, but I'm thinking of some people that I encountered growing up in church that some of them were my relatives and loved ones, and other people, just folks that we went to church with, that had a similar identity, being like that they were queer or same gender loving, however you want to put it, but were not allowed to be themselves and to live into their truth, and all the deep pain that came along with that. Um, how did you ever like deal with that kind of stuff? And then how did you navigate through that, especially being someone that was like in a public facing role for so long in ministry?
So what I hear you asking me is,
Hmm.
how did I deal with, or did I deal with pain or rejection as it relates to family, friends in my coming out process?
Yeah, like that. I would say the external part, but then also the internal part too, of
Right.
like coming to like a realization of like, okay, this is what's going on, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the internal part is interesting. I think we all find ourselves in different spaces, but I experienced life in such a way where I've realized, okay, it's not going to be for the highest good of either me or the person I'm married to for us to continue down this path. And
Mhm.
so the highest use of my love meter was to respect myself and to give my then spouse the space to respect herself. And so
Mhm.
for us, that looked like being real and raw and saying, okay, this is not, the path for us forward. What do we need to do so that we create more healthy experiences for the both of us? And so that's what we
Mhm.
did. But in terms of my internal approach, again, I think it goes back to your God concepts. I began to see God as one who loves, affirms, respects. I heard affirming stories. I saw affirming views of scripture. Those things for me are what mattered. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think wherever you find yourself, you have to figure out what works for you. But if you're going to get from a place of bondage to freedom, and for me, what that means when I'm saying moving from a place of bondage to freedom, if you're locked up within yourself and you can't live in your truth, that's bondage. When you're moving to freedom, it's having the space to be your authentic self. And so, if you're moving from bondage to freedom, even like what Harriet Tubman did, come on, you have to go and press the bounds of your comfort zone. But she was
Mhm.
also enlightened spiritually, right? I mean, if you've seen the movie, you know that there were some spiritual gifts involved of seeing. So the
Mhm.
question I think we have to ask ourselves is, how can we see ourselves in our free place? And what does it look like? What does freedom look like for the individual? And I think once we have a pulse to what freedom looks like for us individually, and then we begin to take the steps to create wholesome and holistic environments and scenarios and scenes for ourselves that are free, I think we take the necessary steps that we need to take. I say do
Mhm.
what you need to do to create your freedom, but if freedom has to come within first.
Yeah.
So my freedom was developed within me first before it manifested. And
Mhm.
so, honestly, my story was probably smoother than a lot of folks. But I'm going to say this: I found my freedom within myself before I ever took the outer steps.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that it helped significantly because once you're solid inside, when other people catch up to the story that you already been on, it's like, and I've had experiences where at that point, like nothing can phase me. Like of course, you're gonna have moments where okay, you would wish people would be a little nicer or whatever, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I can't even trip off of you because I'm so good with me that this is
Mm-hmm.
not really an
Mm-hmm.
issue for me anymore. What your thoughts and your beliefs are about who I am. Yeah. Wow,
Mm-hmm.
that is
Yeah.
powerful.
That's
That is
it.
so
That's it.
powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think about it especially for Black men, because some of the people that came up in my mind when I was asking you that question were Black men that I know. And I'm just like, man, like what, how dope would it be for them to get to a place where they were like, you know what, I'm fine with me. I'm ready to be free and just like move on. And then I think about what impact that has on the body as a whole,
Yes.
meaning the body of Christ as a whole,
Yeah.
when more of us are free to just be
Mhm.
exactly who it is that we are.
Change is never comfortable for the human psyche, and especially not for religious institutions steeped in tradition.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, either we allow stories and broader understandings of scripture and spiritual insight to guide us forward, or we dig our heels in. But, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if we look at history and we look at even the Black church and the history of the Black church, we understand that the Black church has gotten to where it got to because it took a it took a derivative. It launched off of the mainstream understanding of scripture, which was, for our context in America, slaves obey your master.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had to launch off of that. So you say, well, you can't change the word. Well, no, they didn't change the word. We didn't change the word, but we understood that the use of that text in that way was not humane, was not healthy, was not life-giving, was not loving.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
therefore it was a misapplication of the text. So we have to
Mm.
ask ourselves, how do we misapply the text when we keep people in bondage? And not to mention the fact that the physical and the mental struggle that people put themselves through to try to fit into something that they're not could be death dealing. So, like, we've got to
Yes.
find life supporting ways of being more inclusive, and some will dig in their heels. But I'll just say this: most of the resistant organizations and companies and churches that resist change the most either um, die out, or
Mm-hmm.
they become uh, these things that are sequestered all in their own corner with no relevance. So I think we're going to have to ask
Mm-hmm.
ourselves in the future, how do we allow the Spirit to inform us in our evolution and in our growth as a
Yeah.
church, as a
Yeah.
body?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because as the world continues to change and people continue to just stretch out in so many different directions, um, I still believe that the Black church is, you know, powerful on so many different levels. And it's like, how do
Absolutely.
we bring that into the new, millennium, basically, and give us something? Because there are so many different reasons why Black people need it at this point. When you look at stuff that's going on politically, socially,
That's right.
etc.,
Right.
being able to have that foundation. Um, I'm wondering what would you say to people that have felt for whatever reason um, left out of the church, that are looking for ways to find and reconnect with that community? I went through something myself where, I mean, there were so many different reasons. Like, one, I felt like what I was understanding about God wasn't being represented in church anymore. Like, in terms of like the messaging and the speaking, I'm like, I don't know. My brain is like it's too wide open at this point. Like, I feel like I need a little bit more out of this situation. So that was just one thing. But what would you say to people that are seeking that sort of community, but for whatever reason just don't see themselves in the traditional church space?
Well, for one, I think now is a greater opportunity than there's ever been because there are different kinds of churches. The church is not
Hmm.
like monolithic. Christianity is not the same size fits all. Like, it's not one and the same, because one church will give you a very different experience than another
Hmm.
church. And so I feel like, just like you go into the store, now some people are not going to like this, but just like you go into the store and you have to try something on to see if it fits you, and you're not going to just buy anything because you know that that doesn't fit you and you don't feel comfortable in that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the same thing is what you, if you are concerned about your own mental and spiritual health, you'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
You'll go
Yeah.
and see what your options are, and you won't stop at the first option that doesn't fit you well.
Yeah.
You know, so.
That's a very smart way to look at it. And you're right. Some people won't like it because I literally was looking at looking at a church service. And one of the comments was, I know y'all used to going to 5011 churches on Sunday now that we've been online, but it's time. Basically, the message was it's time to shut that down. And I'm like, well, I don't know that I agree with that, but yeah, no, I think it's a good assessment. Just to be able to find the kind of community that really fits you and where it is that you're trying to go spiritually. So
Mhm.
really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um, there was something I was going to ask you, and I just lost my train of thought. But what? Oh, okay. Now I remember what it was. I saw that you went to Bobby Jones
Oh yeah.
and performed. So tell us a little bit about what that experience was like. And for people that are listening that aren't familiar, so Bobby Jones is a legend in the gospel world, especially bringing it to television and having it be, broadcast all over the world, Black gospel music. So, how did that experience come about, and what was it like for you to be able to do that?
Sure. So that experience was brought into my life through the work of Rev Nation, which is a consulting firm for indie gospel artists. It's spearheaded by Denise Tishner Davis. And
Mhm.
so when she brought that to me, I was like, sure, I would love to do it. So my most recent song that I released is I Will Give Glory to Your Name. You can stream it or download it on all the main
Mhm.
platforms. I Will Give Glory to Your Name, Jason Powell with Divinity. But when you pull that up, you'll hear the song. That's the song that I did on Dr. Bobby Jones' show. And it was really great to just be able to see someone that I've seen since I was a kid. He used to be
Mm.
on BET network for
Yep.
years, for many, many, many
Every
years.
Sunday morning on the way to church, have Bobby Jones on. Yep.
Yes, exactly, exactly. But now his show is being broadcast on the Impact Network, which people can download on their mobile devices, and you can also have it as an app, on these smart TVs and all that. But being there, it was great. My mom saw it, and she said, when I was a kid, I had a dream that you were going to be on Bobby Jones, so it's finally come true. I said, well, that's wild how dreams persist.
Mm.
But for me, it was just a great experience, another great experience to be able to share what I feel like I'm supposed to be sharing here.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that is so cool. I'm glad that you got to have that experience.
Thank you.
Because I just think it's amazing how when we take just one step in the direction of our desire, like how many different things just keep getting added to it along the way,
It's good.
just making for a really, really beautiful story that goes on.
Yeah.
So I have your website up, but what other things are you working on right now? What things are you excited about and interested in when it comes to sharing and building with people?
Yes. So I am coming to the end of a long book project, which just kind of distills a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, our subconscious
Mhm.
programming as it relates to our concepts of God, as well as inclusive theology merged with divine empowerment and what that looks like for the individual, the things we say to ourselves, the ways in which we show up in the world. So that's something I've been working on privately. Of course, I'm beginning to get back into the creation of YouTube content. So I got to really dig in there because that assignment, if you will, has really dropped in my mind. Like time to get back onto that. So I'm going to be excited about that as well, and
Mhm.
traveling. So those are the things that I'm doing.
Looking forward to seeing more on the YouTube and everything else that you have going on. But thank you for such a great conversation.
Yes, thank you for having me and inviting me. This was great. It was great to talk to you.
You are welcome. I will talk with you soon.
All right, you have a great one.
Thanks again, Jason, for such a fabulous conversation. I really appreciate you. I will leave links in the show notes to where you can connect with Jason and learn more about his ministry and his work and connect with him on YouTube and all that good stuff. So I will leave those links in the show notes. As always, you can connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Ebony the Writer. Check me out online at ebonychappelle.com. Free People Party November 20th. Tickets available now. Testimony service November 12th. You can RSVP now. I'll leave those links in the show notes as well. As always, have a great time, y'all, and a positive life. Peace.